Welcome to The Art of Average, the show where we take a look at underrated games with unforgettable ideas, and while these games may not have been mainstream hits, they still have something special worth discussing. Today, please join me as we take a look at one such game, E.Y.E, Divine Cybermancy. Before I decided to make this video, my existing playtime on E.Y.E Divine Cybermancy, here on out just called E.Y.E, was a very small 5 hours. However, those 5 hours of game time were spread across years, and many different installations and uninstallations trying to get into this game and understand where the love for it comes from, but then being very quickly reminded just how incredibly complex and obtuse the game really is, before bouncing off, only to repeat the cycle some year or two later. E.Y.E feels like a game that was created in a vacuum, away from all other games like it, but inspired by those mechanics, yet put together in such a bizarre way and presented even more so. For instance, the act of creating a new character. E.Y.E, being an RPG, you might think that you get your character sheet, assign points, pick some basic talents, and then be off into the game. Not with E.Y.E. Instead, you get a skill sheet, yes, but you do not manually assign any points into it either. Instead, you have 3 drop-down menus, each with the same 9 different genes that you can select. These genes add or subtract values to your skills. For example, one gene might improve strength and health, but reduce your hacking and psionic force skills. These 3 genes are then combined together to form the basis of your character's skills. All 3 genes can be different, or they could all be the same, or however else you want to mix and match the genes. But there is then a genetic fusion button, which randomizes the rolls that affect how much these genes will impact your skills. So you could keep rolling to get a higher stat in one skill, or reduce how much negativity it does to another skill. There's 2 fundamental issues I have with this system. This menu pops up without any kind of tutorial or additional information the moment you start the game. Not only is that a fairly disorienting thing to happen right out of the gate, but from the main menu, if you select the button to log out of your avatar, that being the character you just created, you'll have to go back into this menu and then load the avatar from the menu before you can continue the game with this character. It's just all around an incredibly strange way of handling character saves, and gives no proper introduction to what you're supposed to be doing in this menu right away. In my own example, I logged out of the avatar and I thought that my save was actually gone until I found it that I could load it in the character creator menu. The other issue I have with this is that there's no way to view all the stats that get improved or reduced by these various genes. So you have to keep switching between the various genes in order to understand which ones will impact the skills you care about. And because you can't deselect any of the genes, it's tough to understand which skills are being impacted by the gene you just selected, or one of the other 2 genes that are pre-selected when you entered this menu. This is just an example of creating a character, and I hope I properly expressed how odd the game handles almost every single part of its mechanics. At the end of the day, E.Y.E has no interest in holding the attention of the casual gamer. It expects you to bump against the walls in the dark until you finally start to figure out how you can meet it at its own level, because it sure as hell isn't going to do anything to meet you at yours. There is a lot that I struggles to get right, but what makes this game so bizarre to talk about is how so many of the things I does that brings the experience down for me seems so intentional. For example, one of the missions later on while I was playing involved one of my favorite zones so far. You're in these giant skyscrapers that seem to house thousands of people, and it reminds me a lot of the megacity apartments from Dread, which is always a good thing in my book. The mission was one of the best I'd done so far, with a clear mission objective, a couple of ways to handle it, and a level that felt tightly designed with a lot of vertical movement, but you didn't have to do a ton of running around to get to your objectives. The first part of this mission, for me, ended with me being at the upper floor of the building with dozens of enemies swarming in from the lower levels. It absolutely channeled the vibes from The Raid and Dread, shooting over the railings at enemies below and fighting against overwhelming odds. This was fantastic. And for a brief time, I felt like I was really seeing the vision with this game. But then the mission kept going. Now I'm tasked with going into the sewers of this mega city apartment complex and plant various explosives and take out specific enemies. To the game's credit, objectives like this are almost always marked on your heads-up display, so you have an objective marker of where they are. The problem is that the distance between you and your target can be several hundred units away, and down in the sewer area below the excellently designed apartment area, I started to get pretty frustrated with the level design and some other unfortunate design choices. First, the level design down in the sewers. Like the other levels I'd been to before, this was yet another area where I had to walk for what felt like minutes in one direction to get close to the objective I needed. Only, there is a chance that the marker on your screen doesn't take into account the fact that there are other out-of-the-way tunnels you'll need to go down to get to this location first. So you end up wasting your time walking for minutes in one direction, only to find that this was not the correct way to go, so you have to turn around, take another few minutes walk back to the way you came, go down another direction for another few minutes walk to get to where you finally need to be. I had to go down a very long red sewer tunnel at least 3 times in an effort to figure out where I needed to go to kill the final enemy for this mission to get marked as completed. Look, I am all for atmosphere and getting immersed in games. I've had Oblivion and Skyrim runs where I chose not to use fast travel. And I've been playing classic World of Warcraft, and it has its fair share of time spent running from place to place. But usually, in these games where running around is either required or optional, you at least have the ability to understand where the game wants you to go, so that your time spent traveling doesn't feel like a chore, but a moment to take in the environment before getting to the actual content you went there for. I, on the other hand, has no hesitations letting you get lost in its environments, except getting lost in this game is like getting lost in real life, where it's frustrating and frightening, and no one is around to help point you in the right direction, and also you're out of stamina. If there is one thing I would say I needs desperately, is an auto run and sprint toggle. My hand was genuinely cramping up, needing to hold the W and shift keys so much to keep moving forwards in this game. But to make this already annoying thing even worse, is that your stamina runs out pretty quickly and takes a while to come back. So you have to cramp your hand to keep sprinting through these insanely long levels, only to run out of stamina and make the choice if you want to stand still and crouch, of which there is also no toggle, so you have to hold that down as well, so that your stamina comes back faster, or just let go of the shift key and slowly meander through the level, and in a few minutes, hopefully be able to sprint again. This game loves walking so much that every time you load into the game, you actually have to run up to a green portal, which is pretty far away, which hilariously also has to load before this dream sequence and after. It just feels like my time could have been saved by loading into the actual game, as opposed to loading to a dream sequence where I need to then run to a portal to enter a load screen to then get into the game. Okay, rant on that over. What was I saying? Right. So the sewers in this level, putting the need to run and getting lost aside, this level also introduced another issue that this game struggles with: difficulty. Or rather, understanding what is about to completely eliminate your existence without so much as a moment to process what's even happening. While I was running around this sewer level, it actually all started off going pretty well. One of the things you may have noticed about this level from the video is that there's actually shop signs and streetlights. It gives this really cool environmental narrative that there's people living down here, or did at one point, and the streets that people do or used to walk through now serve as the runoff for the people living way up in the clouds. It's cool, and while the game is sometimes too unclear in what's going on, I really appreciated moments like this where the story intersects art, and you can come up with your own ideas and theories on how or why this area is the way it is. Unfortunately, this is where my enjoyment of this area shortly came to an end. Because through the atmospheric fog, making absolutely no sound whatsoever, was a battleship with rockets that was able to snipe me out at a moment's notice. I swear, I thought the game had glitched here and I died by accident. But as I moved through the level and saw the tips during my respawn timer, I realized that this ship is completely intentional. It gives you instructions how to potentially avoid it. It makes next to no noise. It can come flying out of the fog or sneak up behind you, and has the ability to set your health to 0 in the blink of an eye. This made the level so frustrating. Where at first I was enjoying the cool environment, the lone soldiers coming through the fog, the stray mutant monsters running up and making it all creepy but exciting, I was now a head on a swivel, just trying to get to cover as this near instant kill enemy patrolled this huge maze-like level. It stopped being atmospheric and intense, and became frustrating and stressful. You only have a handful of revives allowed per mission, so too much death meant starting all the way back to before I entered the sewers and doing all of this over again. Which does bring me to another interesting part of the game: the save system. E.Y.E does not have a quick save system. In fact, it doesn't even have a manual save system. The game relies entirely on autosaves at moments it chooses. Mainly, this will be at the start of the current mission. In an RPG, which has this much walking in it, this was sometimes quite painful to deal with. Say I walked all the way to my objective, but life happens, and I need to step away and close the game. Well, when I start the game back up, I'm now at the start of whatever mission that was, and I have to walk myself all the way back to where I was. There's also choices that can be made during these missions, so there's no ability to hit a save and see what the different outcomes are. This wasn't a deal breaker by any means, but considering the game uses the source engine, which Half-Life used, and included quick saving, it's so odd that this system was stripped from the game in order to implement such an older way of handling saves. There's a few other things about I that bothered me while playing, but definitely nothing major, just a few things I wanted to bring up and note. First, some of the initial settings in this game are confusing, to say the least. When I looked at an interactable for the first time and saw that it showed I needed to press the Enter key to interact, I thought surely they mean the E key. Nope. E leans to the right. They actually mean that by default, they want you to take your hand all the way to the other side of the keyboard and hit the Enter key. Maybe I thought you really don't interact with things that often, and it isn't that big of a deal. Nah, you are interacting with things constantly. You pick up ammo, talk to NPCs, use consoles, just about everything you would expect an interact key to be used for. Speaking of keys and things getting bound weirdly, you have this quick wheel that you can bring up and map actions to it that you might want to use quickly. Most of these have keybinds, like the flashlight mapped to the G key. I know, another odd keybind. But the issue with this quick wheel is that, at least in my experience, it resets every time I load into the game. There's an almost crucial function that I wanted mapped to the wheel. An ability to perform alchemy and turn weapons and ammo crates on the ground into health. But I kept forgetting that the wheel resets to being empty at the start of the game, and it would be in the middle of combat that I would try and use that wheel to get some health back, only to realize that it all needs to be remapped again. There's some other minor things as well. The game has a really intense motion blur and head bobbing at the start, and this normally doesn't bother me in games, but it felt really intense here, so thankfully I was able to get that disabled, and it wasn't an issue. Hey everyone, just interrupting the video here to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe if you like what you've seen so far. If you like this kind of content, check out the rest of the videos on my channel. I do a lot like this, and I'm planning to do a lot more of it in the future. Thanks so much, on to the rest of the video. So with running marathons between objectives, inconsistent difficulty, an archaic save system, and a handful of other roadblocks that made getting into this game difficult, it probably sounds like I did not have a good time playing this game. But that is very, very far from the truth. Those things definitely made it challenging to get comfortable with this game. And honestly, even after playing for many more hours now, I still feel like I have barely scratched the surface of what this game can offer. I see high-level players able to super jump across a map, sprint at incredible speeds, and weave in and out of combat at breakneck speeds. This game has so much flexibility, character advancement, and potential that it honestly intimidates me to even try and make this video on it. Am I even close to being qualified to talk about this game? I've been chipping away at this game for days, slowly making progress to understanding how all these systems work together, and I feel like I've barely made a dent into the depths that you can take these systems. But despite my own inability to devote the time and energy into this game to see it through to those incredible moments later, I think just the fact knowing that they exist is enough for me. To know that should I continue to push through the endless hallways and unexpected deaths, there is an ability to become godlike in this game and make all that trial and error worth it. However, in the short term, there were some very key things that I found myself enjoying about this game without needing to devote the next several weeks to climbing up this mountain. First, the combat in this game just feels great, and the inventory management to carry it all is pretty unique. You get a really solid selection of guns right at the start of the game through the armory lockers, around missions, and at the central hub. This is where you engage with the game's inventory system. You have 3 sets of armor that you can wear: light, medium, and heavy. They affect your movement penalties and defenses, but otherwise you can carry the same amount of equipment. Guns, ammo, grenades, and other items that you can bring with you all have weight that further impacts your movement penalty. The way the grid-based inventory system works for your character means that you can bring any gun you want, but you need to account for the size of the weapon, and therefore which grid it can sit in your inventory, and also how much ammo you need to bring. Take, for example, weapons like the assault rifle or the pump shotgun. These weapons can only fit within the largest central grid, essentially what your character puts on their back. Pistols and other small guns like the SMG might be able to fit along the smaller grids by your character's legs. From there, you have other, much smaller grids that signify pockets along the arms, waist, and legs. This is, in my experience, where I found it best to throw in additional ammo, grenades, and the medkit. That medkit is an item that first needs to be researched, which you can use the currency gained from doing almost anything in the game, called Brozov. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly, as this did not help whatsoever. This research system is a whole other set of mechanics that I barely made headway in fully understanding. Essentially, from what I could gather, you use the currency to fund research, and then you can scale how many researchers are working on this at a time, which also translates into how many days it takes to finish the researching. The confusing part for me is that I have no idea what this game counts as a day, as you go on missions and there's no clock or change in the time of day. I'm also not sure if there's a limit to how many researchers can be on projects. When I researched the medkit, it seemed to finish immediately, but it seemed like some other projects did not. Again, the systems here are deep, and I'll be the first to accept that I do not fully understand all of them. Maybe not any of them. But I know that there are some very useful things that can be researched, and apparently some other things that are literally useless. Why is it there? No idea. Anyways, once you have your weapon of choice equipped, you start to see how fun the shooting really is. You can aim down sights on almost all weapons, but unlike the crouch and sprint, where there is no toggle, aiming down sights with the right mouse button is only a toggle. Very weird. But the shooting feels good. Weapons have a lot of weight to them, and as you improve your stats that affect accuracy, you start being able to make some really cool shots that look downright cinematic. Weapon fire from any source in the game leaves bullet holes in the environment, which does a really nice job of making the end of a shootout feel like it was chaotic and like it had an actual impact on the environment, as you see bullet holes and enemies just strewn about everywhere. From what I've seen, it looks like enemies, when killed, either despawn very slowly or only after a certain number of other enemies have been killed. I've definitely gone through some rooms where a firefight took place and still been able to see the dropped ammo, bodies, and environmental destruction that took place long after the fight was over. This is also another very interesting aspect of the game. While I mostly talked about these levels as being massive and annoying to walk around, they're also huge dynamic sandboxes where enemy factions and random encounters seem to happen without your own interaction. In one of the early missions in the city streets, I heard the sounds of a firefight between my faction and the enemy faction breaking out. They just happened to spawn in at some point, cross paths, and engage in combat naturally. I could go over and partake in it if I wanted as well. They aren't scripted to go one way or the other, so it really helps make the world feel alive in a way that I did not expect. In that sewer level as well, mentioned earlier, those mutant enemies could be heard attacking the human enemies, and hearing the growls and attacks mixed in with gunfire from a distance in those foggy tunnels was some seriously great atmosphere. Besides the research system, you also get skill points that can go into your typical RPG stats, like strength, agility, etc. But then you also have cybernetic implants menu, where you can spend that Brozov currency to unlock various levels of implants for your character. I mostly went with the leg implants to upgrade my movement speed, but there's a ton of other options here that improves, in one way or another, pretty much anything your character can do. So between the character stats, cybernetic implants, and a research system, there is a ton to dive into with the upgrading aspect of your character, and you can take it a lot of different ways. E.Y.E Divine Cybermancy is a weird game to talk about. It's like for every one thing you could praise it for, you kind of have to qualify it with something else the game does weird or poorly around that same system. The shooting is really fun, but sometimes the game throws an unexpected death at you and it kind of deflates that feeling. The atmosphere is incredible, but you spend most of your time slowly walking through it, just trying to find the next objective. The ability to level up your character into a cybernetic god is really, really in-depth and fun. But you first have to wrap your head around an incredibly in-depth leveling system, implants, and research, some of which is far more useful than others. The developers behind this game, Strayamon Studio, have recently gone on to work on some Warhammer 40k projects, such as Necromunda Hired Gun, but I would really love to see them take another swing at their own universe with a sequel to E.Y.E. Between the tight gunplay, the incredible atmosphere, the in-depth leveling, and the way they built these levels to act like giant sandboxes, they really did manage to make something special here. Smooth out those rough edges, bring the size of the levels down a little bit, and manage how much running you actually have to do in them, and I think they honestly have the makings of a true classic on their hands. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.